32 Paths of Wisdom. The 22nd path is the faithful intelligence and is so called because by its spiritual virtues are increased and all dwellers on earth are nearly under its shadow. The path of Lamed, justice, is between Tifereth and Jabura. Lamed means ox goad, the spear-like prod which keeps the ox moving down the road. This attribution points to the letter's special relationship with Aleph, ox, on the path of the fool. Their interaction is exceptionally complex, although the essential principles can be simply stated. Justice maintains the balance of the tree, so that the outpouring energy of the fool, this has sometimes been called the Holy Ghost, will operate within the confines of a natural pattern. Justice is the administrator of the laws of Binah, written by the Hierophant. It is the ruler of the balance. It is called the faithful intelligence because its spiritual values are increased and all dwellers on earth are nearly under its shadow. This should not be interpreted to mean the intelligence of faith. Rather, it is the intelligence which is faithful to that symbolized by fool. Without Lamed, Aleph could not function as it does. Moreover, the entire tree of life is related to the 22nd path, the number of which is the totality of all the paths. Justice is not one solitary figure or force, it is an amalgam of all the paths which are self-focused. The alignment of forces has been described as being within the essential life force symbolized by the fool. The activity of justice is at work continuously in the above and below, in the greater universe and in the individual soul. Taken to the most mundane, as we drive a vehicle down the road, justice is our correcting of the wheel back and forth in either direction to keep the vehicle centered. Such a purposeful equilibrating function occurs in our bodies, where nourishment must be balanced and continual to keep them operating as proper repositories for the spirit. And an equilibrating function occurs in our personalities, where no constant extreme of behavior can be tolerated if we are to operate effectively in our environments. Justice works both through reason and through natural force. We may decide to bring something of ourselves to balance, but if we do not make that decision, it will be made for us. If we deprive our bodies of sleep, we find ourselves forced to rest. We may simply collapse. The same process occurs at all levels of justice, that is, through the four worlds. We may make a conscious decision, or it may be made for us. In any event, this intelligence is faithful, it guides and protects us. Crowley's title, Adjustment, is appropriate. This is a path where whatever is necessary is done to bring the organism into equilibrium, a process which, as the symbol of the sword suggests, is not always pleasant. This is the sword of Jabura which cuts away all that which is unnecessary, the extraneous dead wood of nature. It is a severe experience, though no punishment is implicit. There is no question of good, bad, right or wrong. As Gareth Knight expresses it, the point to remember in all this is that all the God forms are aspects of the soul itself and not external agencies. Thus the process may be considered psychologically as a condition of self-assessment. The self-assessment. The soul weighs itself on the scales in the left hand and then makes necessary adjustments wielding the sword in the right. One will observe that when the Sephiroth are placed in the human body, Jabura is at the right hand and chest at the left. The sword of justice, the weapon of Elohim Gaiber, god of Jabura, is fearful. It can be swift and devastating in its cutting away of what is no longer needed. It can make war, it can enforce peace. But the sword has two edges, one of which destroys and the other of which consecrates, as in the conferring of knighthood. The cut negative aspects of body and soul is a return to purity, a consecration. This idea of renewed purity is reinforced by the attribution of Libra and the kidneys, which cleanse waste from the body system. Another parallel, suggested by some writers, is that this path relates to purgatory, a condition of consciousness after death, where the soul is cleansed of the dross of its earthly incarnation. Pursuant to the idea of incarnation and reincarnation, this card is said to represent karma, a principle generally understood as the reaping by a newborn soul of what it has sown in past lives. Paul Case, however, insisting that the term has been often misunderstood, states that what karma really means is action. This is an action which is a continuous adjustment. He also describes this key as related to education, insofar as lamed means to teacher. This is an especially interesting observation, not found elsewhere. The conscious maintenance of balance is definitely a learning process. We learn, often slowly and painfully, how to analyze and rebalance ourselves as necessary for different situations. The more we learn of the inner worlds, the more subtle and difficult this becomes. Perfect balance is a formula so precise that the Egyptians symbolized its delicacy as the human soul weighed against a feather. These ancients had a concept of right, truth, law and rectitude, expressed by the single word mot. This originally meant that which is straight, but came to mean also a rule, a measure of some kind, or a law. Mot was symbolized by the feather, against which either the heart of the deceased or his whole body was weighed. In illustrations, we find this weighing administered by Anubis and the results recorded by Thoth. Crowley relates both of these gods to the 19th path, strength, which is the balance between Jebu-Ra and Chesed. The implication is that the adjustment which takes place on the 22nd path is administered and recorded through the processes of the 19th path. As a goddess, Mot represented moral law and truth. She was, in essence, the personification of the concept of Mot. It is this goddess who is shown on the Crowley card, crowned with her attribute, the ostrich feather. The weighing of souls is, of course, also implied in the Golden Dawn, Weight and Marseille versions, the latter two being medieval in tone. In the Golden Dawn card, the figure of a woman rests her feet on a jackal, the animal attributed to Anubis who supervises the weighing of souls. She holds scales which, as in the Crowley card, are black as a reference both to Binah and to Saturn. This means not only assessment, but restriction, which is also time, an important aspect of the administration of the law. By contrast, the weight version, as well as that produced by the O.T.O, shows golden scales, meaning that the individual soul is measured as it stands within the pure golden light of Tifereth. It is only under this light that the sword of Jabura does its work, as is suggested by the Mot legend. Mot relates to the sun god, Ra. She is, in fact, known as the daughter of Ra, as she is Qabalistically named the daughter of the Lords of Truth. The Egyptians also called her Queen of Heaven. Most important is that Mot is the regulator of the path of the sun. The Egyptian texts suggest that it is through Mot that the sun subsists, for Ra is said to rest upon Mot and to live by Mot. In our terms, this means that the principles of the path of justice maintain Tifereth. But insofar as Ra is the source of all light, he is also the fool. Thus one can paraphrase and say that Aleph rests upon Lamed, and that Lamed is the regulator of the path of the divine life force. The relationship between Aleph and Lamed conceals the greatest secret of the tarot, one which is, as Crowley said, beyond all planetary and zodiacal considerations, meaning Kether. In his Book of the Law, Lamed, Aleph, is the key to the entire universe, revealing a mystery of unspeakable profundity. On the Tree of Life, Lamed, Aleph, is also the god name of Chest, the demiurge, lesser creator, from which Microprosopus is formed. A great many planets are involved in this card. First is Venus, which rules Libra, to which this path is directly attributed. Mars is related because this is an exercise of the purging energies of Jabura. The sun is involved not only because the path runs from the sun to Mars, but because justice must take place in the clear bright sunlight of truth. Saturn has already been mentioned and is exalted in Libra. Finally, there is Jupiter, planet of Chest and of Lamed, Aleph. To state that Libra is ruled by Venus is also to state that behind justice stands the Empress, the primary path of Venus, which is the perfect balance between the energies of Chakma and Binah. The reference is also to the nature forces of Netzach. Having noted that Lamed in some way refers to all of the 22 paths and Hebrew letters, it is interesting to recall that Venus refers to all of the Sephiroth. Venus is the only planet whose symbol encompasses every single sephira on the Tree of Life, the implication being that love is the ultimate power of the universe. Thus, to say that Venus rules Libra Lamed is to say that which encompasses all of the Sephiroth rules that which encompasses all of the paths. This may be understood by again considering the idea that the Sephiroth are objective, while the paths are subjective. Objectivity and subjectivity are complementary conditions. One cannot exist without the other, any more than the color red can exist without the possibility of green, or the energies of Mars can exist without those of Venus. Even the floor of the Golden Dawn card, on which lies the jackal of Anubis, refers to a complementary condition, that of greater and lesser creators. The white, which actually represents pure brilliance, is Kether, while purple is the color of Chest and Atzilith. All of the symbolism here points to the idea that this figure is keeping opposites in balance. It is a regulator of energy. Perhaps surprisingly, Wade emphasizes the Mars aspect of justice over its Venus aspect by having the figure clothed primarily in red. And if his card is considered on the pattern of the Tree of Life, when the card is placed on the path of Lamed, it will be seen that the raised sword points to Jabura, while the scales are lowered in the direction of Tifereth. The same purple as in the Golden Dawn tile floor appears on the cloth of honor behind the figure. The background itself is yellow, meaning Tifereth. The differences in the colors of the three versions of justice point out the differing concepts of the designers. The Golden Dawn emphasizes green, flashing against a red throne with a pale blue background. Crowley's card relies on the blues and greens of the 22nd path and the four worlds. The blues are especially vibrant as a reference to the effect of Jupiter on the path. Crowley's adjustment is among the most abstract of his keys. He calls the figure not only the goddess but also Harlequin, the partner and fulfillment of the fool. The figure stands within a diamond shape which is the Vesica Piscis. Behind her is a throne of spheres and pyramids, in groups of 4, meaning law and limitation. This is another reference to chest. As Mach she wears ostrich feathers, with the Urious serpent, lord of life and death, on her forehead. She holds the sword, a male symbol in this context, in such a way as to suggest sexual union and the completion of the female. This is what is described in 777 as the woman justified. By equilibrium and self-sacrifice is the gate. A scale, springing from a point above her head, weighs all that is in creation, the Alpha and the Omega. She is total equilibrium, yet in constant motion. She is the ultimate illusion which is manifestation, she is the dance, many-colored, many-wild, of life itself. Constantly whirling, all possibilities are enjoyed, under the phantom show of space and time, all things are real, the soul is the surface, precisely because they are instantly compensated by this adjustment. All things are harmony and beauty, all things are truth. Because they cancel out. 32 Paths of Wisdom. The 21st path is the intelligence of conciliation, and is so called because it receives the divine influence which flows into it from its benediction upon all and each existence. The path of Caph, the wheel of fortune, runs from chest to Netzach. It is the connecting path between the personality and the higher self on the pillar of mercy under Chakma. The 32 Paths of Wisdom calls it the intelligence of conciliation, implying that it has a mediating function. And, in view of what has been considered about the regulation of energy on the path of justice, it is not surprising to learn that Jupiter is assigned to this path, or that Jupiter is said to govern the circulation of the blood. Caph is a double letter, one of the gateways of the soul. To it are attributed the opposites of riches and poverty, which could be considered the natural fluctuation of the Jupiter forces on this path. Of course, the riches and poverty are not of this earth, they are of the soul itself. As a word, Caph means fist. It is the closed hand which symbolizes grasping comprehension, as well as the completion of an activity or the closing of a circle. It is closed, and yet it is in a state continuous motion, a cycle always in many stages at the same time. In this regard, Caph is the scarf covering the dancer in the universe card. Moreover, it will be found that as Caph is the closed hand, the card preceding it, the Hermit, Yod, is an open one. The wheel, so important to this path, is a very ancient symbol of life itself, the very turning of which, in some systems, is a prayer. It is the wheel of birth, death and rebirth. It is the wheel of karma. But it is emphatically not a wheel of chance or accidents. There are no accidents in the universe, which is one of the key lessons of this card. We are solely responsible for our own destinies. Fortune provides us what we earn, which is not always pleasant. The key to the wheel of fortune is duality and the interchange of energies between opposites, which make the wheel spin. The wheel is the activity of all manifestation, as is symbolized in the Golden Dawn version by the 12 spokes. These are the signs of the zodiac, each in its correct Atzilith path color. The Crowley deck uses 10 spokes to symbolize the totality of the Sephiroth, while Waite uses a system of 8 spokes based on twice 4. The letters Taro and the Tetragrammaton. The pattern of Waite's wheel is based on the wheel of Ezekiel illustrated by Levi in his magical ritual of the Sanctum Renum, and described by the older occultist in very complex terms. The wheel of Ezekiel contains the solution of the problem of the quadrature of the circle and demonstrates the correspondences between words and figures, letters and emblems. It exhibits the tetragram of characters analogous to that of the elements and elemental forms. It is a glyph of perpetual motion. The triple ternary is shown. The central point is the first unity, 3 circles are added, each with 4 attributions, and the dodecat is thus seen. The state of universal equilibrium is suggested by the counterpoised emblems and the pairs of symbols. The flying eagle balances the man, the roaring lion counterpoises the laborious bull. Kether, the crown, Tifereth, beauty, and Yesod, foundation, form a central axis, while wisdom, Chakma, equilibrium with understanding, Bina, and the severity of justice, Jabura, makes a counterpoise with the mercy of justice, chest. Insofar as dualities in active manifestation are implied here, it might be suggested that 2 wheels would better describe what is intended than one. I.e., one wheel interlocked in another like a gyroscope, each turning in different directions. This really illustrates what is meant by the intelligence of conciliation. It is the mediation of activity between rotating opposites. Rotation, in this sense, means a sequence, something which begins and ends and then begins again. This means periodicity, rhythms of activity as well as cause and effect, what the Golden Dawn text calls the counterchanging influence of light and darkness. Weight describes this activity as the perpetual motion of a fluidic universe, the flux of human life. The Sphinx is the equilibrium therein. The Sphinx is the stable element in the midst of change. Thus in both the Crowley and the Weight cards, it sits at the very top of the wheel. In the Golden Dawn card, however, it is removed from the wheel entirely. While Crowley and Weight emphasize the Sphinx as a balancing phase of cyclic energy, the Golden Dawn card emphasizes its role as the guardian of the gateway of the mysteries, holding the secret of life and death. This interpretation is a later, largely Greek one, colored to some extent by 18th century Romanticism. In Egypt, the Sphinx was originally a portrait of the pharaoh, symbolizing his great power, the lion's body, over adversaries. This view is corroborated by numerous reliefs in which the Sphinx pharaoh is shown vanquishing his enemies. The best-known Sphinx is that presumed to be Cheops, who built the Great Pyramid about 2500 BC. When the Greeks saw this monumental sculpture, more than 1500 years later, they took it to mean all that was mysterious and magical, a sense reflected in the tale of Oedipus on the road to Thebes. The Sphinx barred the road and asked each traveler the question: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the afternoon? Those who failed to answer the question were destroyed. Oedipus, however, knew that the answer was man, himself, who crawls in childhood, walks on 2 legs in adulthood, and uses a cane in old age. The response of the Sphinx to Oedipus's correct answer was to throw itself into the sea, an action replete with meaning for the student of the Qabbalah. The Greeks brought one important modification to the Sphinx image. What was originally the portrait of a pharaoh on a lion's body became a woman on the body of a male lion. Thus, the Sphinx came to represent not only man with the raw power of the animal kingdom, but also a balance of male and female in the same form. The special importance of the Sphinx to the Golden Dawn is discussed in the Order's papers on the Enochian mysteries. Now learn a mystery of the wisdom of Egypt. When the Sphinx and the pyramid are united, thou hast the formulae of the magic of nature. These are the keys of the wisdom of all time, and its beginning who knoweth it? In their keeping are the sacred mysteries and the knowledge of magic and all the gods. In the ritual of the 32nd path leading into the Theoricus grade, it is thus written: the Sphinx of Egypt spake and said, I am the synthesis of the elemental forces. I am also the symbol of man. I am life. I am death. I am the child of the night of time. Most original here is the concept that the Sphinx is the synthesis of the elemental forces, recalling the pentagram, symbol of man, which is the spirit above the 4 elements. In fact, the documents state that there are 4 forms of the Sphinx: bull, eagle, man and lion. It is not entirely clear why Weight has shown these animal symbols holding books, although we must assume this to be a reference to the 4 Gospels. The lion, eagle, man, and bull, found in the vision of Ezekiel, and possibly of Assyrian origin, were taken by Christianity to represent the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And when the cherubim are shown holding books, it means the different acts of Christ about which each evangelist wrote. Here Weight may be extending an assertion by Levi that the wheel is comparable to the Greek monogram of Christ. What is important, at any event, is the amalgam of 4 elements on this path. The Sphinx is the cherubim all in one. Moreover, the pyramid which, when united with the Sphinx supposedly provides a magical formula, is 4-sided and refers to chest. The Sphinx is, thus, a cardinal symbol of manifestation. It is both that through which one passes in birth or death, and that which controls the passage. It is the directing aspect of the higher self and Tifereth, it is protective, and a keeper of the gates, which keeps the personality from absorbing more than its system can handle. To be able to correctly answer the question of the Sphinx, that answer being an extension of the Greek axiom, man, know thyself, means that one is prepared to pass through the gates of inner consciousness. To pursue the Oedipus legend. When the question was correctly answered, the Sphinx threw itself into the sea. This means that, being no longer needed, the gate now being open, the gatekeeper was absorbed back into the great sea of consciousness. More accurately, it was absorbed back into the individual higher consciousness which created it. On the other hand, the Sphinx slays those who are unready to pass consciously beyond the restrictions of time and space, concepts valid only in terms of matter. The destruction by the Sphinx of those travelers who cannot answer its question is the protection of the personality by the higher self. But it may also be considered the real death process. Those who know the nature of the Sphinx may pass consciously from one state to the next, while others fall into a deep sleep, a destruction of awareness from which the soul gradually awakens into a new condition. Beside the wheel itself, the Sphinx is the only element common to the 3 modem versions of the key shown here. The Golden Dawn card has only 2 figures, that of the Sphinx and the cynocephalus. The weight card shows the Sphinx, Hermanubis and Tiphon, as does Crowley's version. The figures in the Marseille key represent a transitional period in the Wheel of Life iconography. The wheel, which seems to have originated during the Romanesque period, 11th to 12th centuries, was a popular device for representing man at the mercy of changing fortune. In the earliest versions, human figures were shown on the wheel, with one above that is ruling. Animal figures were probably introduced toward the end of the 15th century to underscore man's animal nature and the mutability of life. Thus, the Marseille card shows very generalized figures of good and evil, with a ruler above who balances these aspects on the wheel. The imagery serves to remind us, by comparison with the other cards, of the extent to which the symbolic explanation of the tarot has been embellished over the past 200 years. From the mid-19th century on, each of the figures has borne a very specific mythological reference. Beginning with the Golden Dawn card. What is called the Plutonian cynocephalus is a dog-faced ape sitting beneath the wheel. This animal, symbolizing time and eternity, is the traditional companion of Thoth, Hermes Mercury, and is the hieroglyphic symbol for writing. Thoth is the inventor of writing and the scribe of the gods, who waits, especially, upon Osiris. It is he, called the Lord of Holy Words, who records the results of the weighing of souls on the path of justice. Thoth is also said to have measured time, dividing it into years, months and seasons. Thus time and eternity is attributed to his companion, the cynocephalus, which the ancients referred to the moon, the planet believed to follow Mercury. The implication of the Golden Dawn illustration is that the Sphinx and the cynocephalus are two different, above and below, aspects of the stable force which monitors and regulates life's seasons. The Sphinx is the quadripartite elemental being guided by the higher consciousness, the human head. The cynocephalus, body of the faithful ape linked with the head of a form almost human, means the words which we use. These words are the vibratory patterns of existence which turn the wheel. And, as the Gospel of St. John begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This passage has to do with the lesser divine creator, the demiurge which we have identified as chest, origin of the path of the Wheel of Fortune. In general, the card means that when the higher self brings the four elements under control, the words, vibratory patterns, become our faithful companion, and we are no longer bound to the wheel. The Waite and Crowley cards, both more traditional than that of the Golden Dawn, must be interpreted in terms of the interaction of Sphinx, Hermanubis and Tiphon. Hermanubis is a dual god, which Case mistakenly called a combination of Hermes and Anubis, but actually combining Horus and Anubis. He is Heru Anpu, meaning Horus as Anubis. This god form, a later Egyptian development, is described by Wallace Budge as possessed of two distinct and opposite aspects. As the guide of heaven and the leader of souls to Osiris, he was a beneficent god, but as the personification of death and decay, he was a being who inspired terror. The myth of Tiphon or Typhus is of Greek origin. Tiphon was involved in the wars of supremacy of the gods. He was a monster so horrible that even the gods fled at the sight of him. But, as the legend goes, he was eventually subdued by Zeus, who set him afire and buried him under Mount Etna. So Tiphon became known as the fire-breathing monster who personified volcanoes and typhoons. He was also called the father of the Sphinx. As his mythology developed, Tiphon was associated with the Egyptian god, Set, brother and murderer of Osiris. Set was the symbolic dark side of Osiris, recalling the Golden Dawn text, stating that this card involves the counterchanging influence of light and darkness. Tiphon is also associated with the dragon Apophis, who is the accuser in the Book of the Dead. Insofar as Tiphon is shown as a snake, as in the Waite card, he is one of the forms of Set. All of this is linked together by the idea that Anubis, who is also Horus, is often represented, like Saint George, slaying the serpent. Thus in Tiphon and Hermanubis, we have phases of energy which supersede, slay, one another, three types of energy which underlie manifestation. These appear at the center of Waite's wheel as the symbols of salt, sulfur, and mercury. The fourth figure, the same as the sign of Aquarius, is the alchemical symbol for dissolution. In the Hindu system, what the West calls the three alchemical principles are called gunas. The gunas are sattva, rajas and tamas. Sattva is the philosophic Mercury, superconsciousness. Rajas is sulfur, activity, passion and desire. Gunas is salt, it is ignorance and inertia, subconsciousness. The idea that the Wheel of Fortune symbolizes the revolution of natural phases is generally accepted, though there is some confusion about which of the gunas is applied to which figure. Crowley states that the Sphinx is sulfur, Hermanubis is mercury, and Tiphon is salt. The Golden Dawn version, on the other hand, would allow the Sphinx to be considered nothing less than the superconsciousness, sattva, the philosophic mercury. And we see that in Waite's card the Sphinx sits above the Mercury sign on the wheel. In the Golden Dawn papers it is stated that Mercury is attributed to Kether, Salt is attributed to Chakma, and Sulfur is attributed to Binah. The three principles of nature are also related to the three maternal letters of the Sefer Yetzirah. 32 Paths of Wisdom. The 20th path is the intelligence of will, and is so called because it is the means of preparation of all and each created being, and by this intelligence, the existence of the primordial wisdom becomes known. The path of Yod connects Tifereth, the Christ Buddha center, and Chest, the architect of manifestation. In brief, it represents the self-sustained primal beginnings of manifestation. It is the very point of origin of our manifest universe, in direct contact with the divine source of all. It is the path from the demiurge out of darkness. It is the coming of the light of manifestation through microprosopis. Insofar as the sign Virgo is attributed to the 20th path, we understand the Hermit to be ever virgin, pure, and totally innocent. And insofar as it represents a gateway to the bridge between macroprosopis and microprosopis, it involves certain qualities of Doth. These Doth qualities are represented by the very isolation of the figure. There is something naturally mysterious and compelling about this figure standing alone in the desert holding its own source of light. One immediately thinks of Diogenes in search of an honest man, or Moses, whose head supposedly emanated rays of light, or Christ as the light of the world. One may also consider, in studying this solitary figure, that monasticism first began in the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries, after the death of Christ. Extreme asceticism and withdrawal from society were considered a means of perfection. In fact, the very word hermit comes from a Greek word meaning desert, the place where some of the earliest monks lived in walled-up rooms of one window. The higher the card on the tree of life, the more important it is that we let the card suggest such images as they will. The image of a desert, for example, is a very potent one. Conceptually, it is an expanse of earth as indefinably vast as the ocean. And as we consider Binah in the image of deep, dark, endless waters, we may envision the desert as a crystallization or precipitation out of Binah's vast sea of consciousness. The Hermit is an expression of the same energy as the Fool. It is at once the wise old age of the child, of the Golden Dawn Fool card, and the virgin beginning of a new sequence. It is the purity and innocence of the Fool as it is transformed in the projection of microprosopis through Binah. The idea that the Fool, child, is at the same time the Hermit, old man, may best be understood by meditating on the snake which holds its tail in its mouth, the traditional symbol of wisdom. It has been stated that justice, the path opposite the Hermit, administers the energies in manifestation of the Fool. Thus, we appreciate that justice and the Hermit must also work together in some basic way. One clue to this mystery is, again, in the Lamed Aleph, justice plus the Fool, which is also the god name of Chest, point of origin of the path of the Hermit. Most important is that the Hermit represents communication between the higher self of Tifereth, the Ruach, and the spiritual self of Kether, the Uchitta. For this reason the Golden Dawn text calls the Hermit the first of 3 great initiatory cards, the others being Strength and the Chariot. In this regard it should be pointed out that the experiences of all these paths may be gained on the path of the High Priestess. That path not only encompasses all paths above Tifereth, but crosses the abyss with its devastating experience of divine reconciliation through isolation. However the Hermit may be described, it is preeminently one of union. It represents the first point of awareness by the higher self of the supreme spiritual self, explicable only in the most erotic of imagery. This idea is supported by the Sefer Yetzirah, which attributes sexual love to the simple letter Yod. But this is not the sexuality of coition, for the card is the essence of isolation and singularity. The sexuality is self-contained and self-sustaining, a quality cryptically described in the Golden Dawn documents as prudence. Yod is related to Kether not only insofar as it is isolated and self-contained, but also in that it forms the graphic root for all of the other letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Moreover, the Yod is phallic. It is the male fire which rushes outward the female water. In the Golden Dawn version this is symbolized by the sign on the front of the Hermit's hood. The Yod within a fire triangle means that the Yod is the very essence of spiritual fire within microprosopis. It is, thus, an aspect of the Chakma force. It is the All-Father in manifestation below the abyss, which is related to the Logos. The concept of Logos, while not at all difficult, is often misunderstood. Logos is a Greek term usually considered to mean word, which came to represent a principle of both Greek and Hebrew metaphysics. In the simplest possible terms, the Logos is a link, an intermediary between God and man. The same is true for any sacrificed god, including Christ, Osiris, or Buddha. On the tree of life, Tifereth is the objective logos, the objective center of energy produced by the demiurge, chest, as a direct link of the lower with the higher. But, in terms of the paths, which are subjective, the link is on the path of the hermit. This is to say that while objectively Tifereth is the logos center, subjectively, in order to understand this transitional energy, we must rise above Tifereth toward chest, on the path of the hermit. Qabalistic attitudes toward what is called the logos relate largely to Philo, a Jewish philosopher living at the time of Christ. He was a synthesizer of Greek and Hebrew thought. To the Hebrews the word, vibration, was power. To the Greeks, the logos was spermatic, meaning that it was the source of all. Heraclitus described it as a divine fire which stimulated and maintained order. The Stoics saw the logos as an all-pervading force in the world. Later, the Neoplatonic doctrine of the logos in emanations influenced a writer of the Sefer Yetzirah. What Philo did, no mean trick, was to combine the Jewish concept of word with the Platonic concept, related especially to the Timaeus, of manifestation, evolving from a point of transition between the Godhead and man. The hermit may be considered a word, vibration, uttered into a vast space. The word is that which continually stimulates the development of manifestation, which energizes the principles of form which it has produced. While the hermit is often considered a Christ figure, he is better related to Moses, who led his people across the same Egyptian desert in which monasticism developed centuries later. Moses was first related to the Logos by an early Gnostic sect, taking its name from the Simon Magus described in the Acts of the Apostles. These Simonian Gnostics of about the 2nd century AD believed that the book of Exodus was an allegory of the soul being led by the Logos, Moses, through the desert of life into the spiritual promised land. In other terms, Moses is the thaumaturge, the arch-magician. His staff is a wand of enormous power which strikes water from rock and turns into a serpent at his bidding. This latter act refers to the use of the kundalini, yod, force by the adept magician. That force is the sacred fire, which is the essence of the logos transmitted by the phallic wand. One other correspondence between Moses and the logos is found in the interaction between the prophet and God as the burning bush. The word of God is not issued directly, but comes through Moses as intermediary, the function of the logos. More than this, Moses may be considered a tool of the Supreme Father, carrying out his will. In this regard, the hand, man's ultimate creative tool, is attributed to Yod. The hermit is the very hand of God. The hand of the hermit is open as opposed to that of the wheel of fortune. The open hand is a sign of ultimate power, found especially in Byzantine representations of the Pantocrator, Christ as the ruler of the universe. But the open hand is also a sign of innocence, it may give and take freely without the impediments of thought or moral restrictions. The open hand represents the hermit as prophet, the completed adept. Insofar as the hermit is the adept magician, he is the agent of the supreme will and, as such, the 32 paths of wisdom, calls the 20th path the intelligence of will. There is a strong link between the hermit and the path of the magician, the intelligence of transparency, since Virgo is ruled by Mercury. This means that the philosophic Mercury ultimately directs the course of the Yod fire on the paths. The fact that Virgo is may be somewhat confusing, in that any discussion of the hermit invariably centers on the idea of fire. Hopefully it has been understood that the fire in question here is not the same as either elemental fire or maternal fire. The hermit could be called the first earth, within which a sacred fire operates. The Yod force, again, enervates to keep the world in order, a stimulus which could be described as a fertilization. The concept is an extremely difficult one which has to do with multifaceted potentiality. Approached from another direction, it could be said that the most ordered existence is Earth, here represented as wholly barren, but with the potential for all life. In the Golden Dawn card, the importance of Binah in this process is suggested by the red band around the hermit's waist. The Venusian green of Earth is bound up by the Atzilith red Binah cord. The Golden Dawn emphasizes the earthy, monastic qualities of the figure. And while it may be stretching the symbolism to make the suggestion, the dual robes recall the titles of Binah and Chakma. The outer robe of concealment, Binah, and the inner robe of concealment, Chakma. The staff is, of course, referred to Chakma. It is held here in such a way as to suggest that it is to be planted and will grow leaves and flowers. Of the 4 versions, only Crowley's suggests the motion and activity which is essential to the Yod. And, as usual, his card requires more explanation than the others. He emphasizes, for example, the idea that the hermit is rooted in Binah by cloaking him entirely in red. Before the red figure is the Orphic egg with a serpent wrapped around it. In the ancient Orphic mysteries, this signified the cosmos encircled by the fiery spirit, which is Yod. Behind the figure is Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the gates of hell and who has been tamed by the Hermit. The spermatozoon is symbolic of the yod energies in the material world, while the staff which transmits the sexual force is completely hidden. As Crowley states, in this trump is shown the entire mystery of life in its most secret workings. Yod equals phallus equals spermatozoon equals hand equals logos equals vision. Yod has been called the crown, meaning that it is the highest point of the logos, the primary energy from which manifestation derives. And, of course, any reference to crown points to Kether, the crown above all. The last symbol to be considered is the lamp which, in all versions refers to Tifereth and makes a statement about the very nature of light. In the Golden Dawn rituals this principle was expressed in three languages: Qabs Impect, Coptic, Conx Pax, Greek, light in extension. This means that light is the principle of manifestation, that on which all of creation is built. So the Hermit may be said to represent a glyph on the nature of primal manifestation beneath the abyss and of the relationship between light and the sacred fire, symbolized by Yod. One would expect that the placement of the letters Yod, Het and Vau on the tree of life would have profound meaning. Thus it is particularly intriguing to realize that these letters work together as a trinity from chest to Tifereth to Chakma and back to chest. Yod is the Hermit, He is the Emperor, and Vau is the Hierophant, all functioning to the side of the Pillar of Mercy on the Tree of Life. The intention here is not to offer an explanation, but to suggest a very valuable subject for meditation. 32 Paths of Wisdom. The 19th path is the intelligence of all the activities and spiritual beings, and is so called because of the affluence diffused by it from the most high blessing and most exalted sublime glory. In our upward progress on the tree of life, the path of strength leads to the edge of the abyss, as did the Hermit. And as we come closer and closer to the source of all, the ultimate simplicity, it is perhaps paradoxical that the symbolism becomes increasingly complex. In the lower cards, energies and experiences can be accurately described in words. But at this level on the tree and above we learn primarily by meditation on the interrelationship of symbols, in which great profundities are secretly embedded. Few, for example, might even suspect that this picture of a woman with a lion could have such vast meaning. In terms of evolution, the 19th path is the first path of microprosopis, the lesser countenance. It is the outpouring of energy from chest to jabura in the process of manifestation. It is the primary path of the higher self, linking the great opposites below the abyss. It is the path on which fire becomes light, for manifestation is light, whereas the supernals are a darkness which is fiery. Thus, in his Book of Tokens Case speaks of the radiant darkness of the limitless light. To the path of strength are assigned both the Hebrew letter Teth and the most powerful sign of the zodiac, Leo. Leo is lion, while Teth means snake, and the interchangeability of the lion and snake symbolism is an important key to the meaning of the card. As the symbols interchange, we understand that the realities which they represent can also be interchanged. The one spirit takes any form it wills, which is an important lesson of this path. The idea is clearly expressed in the Zohar. The three principal elements of nature are fire, air and water. Really they are one in use and substance and are able to change the one into the other. It is the same with thought and speech and logos, they are one and the same in themselves. As the serpent holds its tail in its mouth it represents wisdom and the universe, noting here that taste is attributed to Teth in the Sefer Yetzirah, whereas the same serpent is described in Genesis as the tempter. Moreover, insofar as it is the fiery, vital life force, it is also the Redeemer. This is the same, apparently contradictory idea encountered with the primary card of matter, the devil, which is also both tempter and redeemer. And, interestingly enough, the lion is occasionally related to Saturn, the supposed place of dwelling of the devil. Fortunately, the Qabalah allows us to put these symbols into very clear perspective, as Bina Saturn is the ultimate source of the devil's imprisoning matter. It must be admitted that the lion has been used in so many different cultures and symbolic pantheons that it may be claimed to have mutually exclusive meanings. But, generally, references to the lion have to do with its physical strength. This is not a card of intellect in any way. The greatest strength of which man can conceive is the light of the sun, the ruler of Leo. And, as we shall consider, it is the lion which is permitted to open the sacred scroll of the apocalypse. This means that the solar power, represented by this card, can open the higher levels of consciousness beyond the sun, Tifereth, itself. In symbolism, this is shown most graphically by representations of the sun god Mithra, whose body is human, but whose head is that of a lion. The lion symbolism always implies a brute force which may be used constructively or destructively. This is the very path on which the sword of Jabura is formed, indicating that the possibility of the philosopher being overwhelmed by the power which he invokes is always present. Such danger is stressed, for example, in the story of Daniel in the lion's den, one closely related to the symbolism of this card. Daniel is, like Moses, a magician, thaumaturge, holding back the destructive power of the lions through sheer force of will. Daniel, the three Hebrews in the fiery furnace, Noah, and other such figures were chosen by the earliest Christians as biblical representatives of salvation. On the wall of a catacomb, a depiction of Daniel means, in essence, "Let him who is buried here be saved as Daniel was saved from the lions." Thus, a simplistic faith in divine protection came to overshadow a symbolism of far greater consequence, that of the enlightened individual controlling the animal potency underlying all existence. In the symbolism of alchemy, the lion takes three separate forms. First, there is the green lion, the energy of nature before it is purified and subjected to the will. Next is the red lion, represented on the card of strength. This is the force of nature under perfect control, what the alchemists would describe as the sulfur, solar energy, combined with Mercury, will. Weight underscore meaning by showing the infinity sign of the magician above the woman's head. This is the directing willpower of the 12th path, what Mathers calls the philosophic Mercury. Finally, there is the old lion, meaning the completely purified consciousness, the linking of all components of the soul with the highest spiritual self, which is older than time itself. The lion figures in ancient legends and in Christian legends, such as the story of Saint Jerome, where the saint removes a thorn from the lion's paw, and the grateful animal becomes his servant. The consistent thread running through such tales has to do with the wise person who subjugates the wild animal through the force of his humanity. It is the highest quality of man controlling the highest quality of beast, of which the lion is king, an idea sufficiently common in history that it may be considered an extension of Jung's wise old man archetype. In this regard, we appreciate that each and every one of the tarot trumps represents a body of teaching, legend, or tradition, deeply rooted in the group soul of mankind and expressed in different ways throughout history. Pursuant to the relationship of the symbolic lion with the sun, there is some possibility of confusion. At one level, the lion is the cherub of fire, symbol of one of the four elements. But this is not the same as the lion of the sun's spiritual fire, or Kundalini, which is also the serpent. The fiery lion serpent is one aspect of the life force which, in manifestation, is a duality of activity and passivity. Kundalini, the sacred fire, is the active phase of this energy, purposely unleashed and directed by the will. This is suggested by the double ends of the rods in the hands of the figure in the universe, a card related to strength in several ways. It will, for example, be noted that the scarf on the figure in the Golden Dawn card is similar to that worn by the figure in the universe. Both are veils. Both are concealing of principles, though at different ends of manifestation. Strength is the beginning of microprosopis, while the universe is the completion of the process. The woman who has tamed the energy of the lion and the woman who dances in space surrounded by the four cherubim are both expressions of that which is, at the highest level, the Empress. This is a very powerful path, one on which it is not possible for a sensitive person to meditate without profound effects on the psyche. The card may come to be appreciated as a statement of methodology, whereby the willpower controls the vital life energy. The Book of Tokens suggests that the secret of this methodology lies in number, although as used in that text, the word means the germ of separation into what can be counted as divided from the one. Number veileth the power of the Elohim, for number is that thick darkness whereof it is written, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness, where God was, and again, Tetragrammaton said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. And, it continues, of that darkness the serpent is a sign, the great serpent, the royal snake of Egypt. This is the serpent of temptation, yet from it cometh redemption. For the serpent is the first appearance of the Anointed One. Strength represents a very important initiatory formula dealing with the serpent power. It is this power which is used to stimulate the various chakras, or centers of energy in the body. The principles embedded in number, as defined above, teach us how to use this power, which is not to suggest that the process is cold and distant. On the contrary, Crowley's title, Lust, is quite appropriate. What is involved is the development of a divine frenzy, as is meant by the frequently repeated instruction. Inflame thyself with prayer. Or, as the alchemists express it, the heat of the furnace makes the stone. The heat is a great passion within the confines of an exercise, such as that of the middle pillar. The method is a recurring theme in the correspondence courses of Paul Case. In one lesson, he says of inner exercises. By prolonged practice, pursued something for months and years without apparent result, those who follow the way of liberation effect changes in their subconsciousness. These changes are symbolized by key 8 and produce at the same time the results shown in key 16. Repeatedly he states that the whole point of meditational exercises is an actual and subtle change in the structure of the body cells. And those who are familiar with Diane Fortune's definition of the Kabbalah as the yoga of the West will appreciate that Case said directly things at which she was only willing to hint. When we have the important keys, all mystical literature suddenly opens up and seems genuinely simple. Such is the case with the Book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, which utterly confounds most biblical scholars and is the source of some extraordinary scholarly nonsense. Revelation, like the Book of Genesis, is one of the great Qabalistic documents. Thus, one should not be surprised to find that strength, or Crowley's lust, relates directly to that work by St. John. In Revelation it is stated that the lion, representative of the tribe of Judah, the descendants of David, had won the right to open the scroll and break its 7 seals. But as the seals are to be broken, we discover that the lamb has taken the place of the lion. The lion has, in fact, become the lamb of 7 eyes. These are the 7 chakras which are activated by the lion-serpent power. This is the taming of the lion by the woman in strength. In Qabalistic terms, this means that to bring the energies symbolized by the lion under perfect control is to open the seals on the book of reality above the abyss. The symbolism refers to the method by which one may know that from which manifestation emerges the supernal triangle of the tree of life. It should be noted here that the path of Teth is the highest on the tree, with no direct connections into the supernals. It is, thus, an important path of transition. It is, like the Hermit, a gateway to Doth. In the Golden Dawn version of both cards, Doth is suggested by the desert. As we cross the desert, going upwards, we are let out of bondage by the logos itself. Moses is the light. Even Crowley's card may be interpreted in this way, though he has placed his card on the 11th path, traditionally given to justice. His symbolism is perfectly consistent with the meaning of the Golden Dawn or Weight cards, relative to Doth, of which he commented in the Equinox. And Doth is said to be the head of the great serpent Netchish or Leviathan, called evil to conceal its holiness. This reasoning is interesting in terms of lust, where he represented the 7-headed beast of the Apocalypse, with which he personally identified. One may suggest that Crowley related himself to the beast under the same philosophical twist as he described for the serpent, that is, an evil which is only apparent and actually concealing of the greatest good. One can argue theologically that God creates only good, and that what appears to be the greatest evil must actually conceal good. At any event, some may find it very uncomfortable, even pathological, that Crowley has so woven the trappings of his own personality into the cards, although it requires some study to understand the extent to which this is the case. Others may find his choice of imagery curious, wondering that he should illustrate a card of such spiritual potency as strength with the Scarlet Woman of the Apocalypse, riding the beast. Crowley made the connection through gematria on the number 666, to which he related his own name, the sun, what he called the stele of revealing, and the beast of revelation. Although the image is somewhat shocking in this context, Crowley has used the Whore of Babylon to represent the epitome of virginity, that which is symbolized in the Golden Dawn card by the 4 flowers, she said, and by the wreath in Waite's card. The principle is, again, that of the greatest evil concealing the greatest good. The woman is of the same innocence as the Hermit. She is Virgo intacto, and it is only as such that she can, with complete safety, deal with the lion. She might also be considered one of the Vestal virgins keeping the sacred fire.